Hey, welcome to the 8th chapter of The Path of Listening. I'm Omar Zulai. And today we have someone that not only just changed the way that people all around the world are working with horses, he changed the way that people are listening to them. Warwick Schiller began his journey in the world performance of reining competitions, where precision and result are everything. But over the time, something shifted. What started as a reach or a search for a better outcome became something much more deeper. Deeper journey or exploration into presence, awareness, and the subtle conversation that happened beyond the technique. Today Warwick is a research far behind horsemanship. He speaks about connection, emotional regulation, and the inner state that we bring to every interaction in our life. For me, his work teaching something essential, the understanding that horses does not respond to what we are doing. They respond to who we are and what gonna allow us to be better. So let's start and dive direct to the first question. If you need to describe the start of how you did the change from, let's say, the old version to the new version of you.
You know what? I think there's a lot of little things along the way that kind of add up to the beginning of it that you don't even know is happening at the time. You know, it's interesting. There's a girl who used to follow me on Facebook a lot. She was from Sweden, and on Facebook, if someone asked a question, this girl would always give what I felt was the correct answer. Like she knew her stuff. And I figured she was this really experienced horse person. And I actually met her at a clinic in England. And it turns out she's not that experienced, but she is autistic and has a mind that can just remember all sorts of things. It was really interesting when I met her at this at this clinic. Was sitting down at lunchtime, and I had a cowboy hat on, and she said, "I'm autistic." She said, "And I don't recognize faces. I recognize shapes." She said, "If you got up now and left the room and came back with no hat on and sat down, I wouldn't know who you were." I'm like, "Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that." So I'd known her for quite a while, and I was videoing a horse at home. I was working with one of my horses who was a little bit, just this horse was a little bit odd, a little bit weird. And she messaged me and she said, "You know that thing you did in that video? You should wait longer." And at the time I was like, "Oh, I wonder why that was." So she just said that little thing that kind of got me thinking about things. And, you know, there was a million other things too. But then my wife bought a reining horse who had some little issues that the trainer that had him had trouble with, but they're not the sort of issues I would have trouble with. Like he was spooking at the judges' chairs and things like that. It wasn't the technical stuff. And so we bought him. You know, he was really cheap because he was a superior athlete. They just couldn't get him shown. You know, he just couldn't repeat what he can do at home in the show ring for various reasons. So we bought him, and I said, "Yeah, I can fix all that stuff." And yeah, all those things, it was easy to make headway with. You know, that was relatively simple. But he was just a weird little horse who, I don't know. Do you know much about the reining at all?
Yeah, I was competing in Israel.
Oh, okay.
Second
You
in
know,
the Open in Israel. Not that the Open in Israel is the highest level in the world, but
all right.
yeah.
You're pretty good. Yeah. So what he would do is when you ran fast circles, he'd run, but he was just a little bit tight. And every once in a while he'd bounce his hind feet together, which is, it's a 1 point penalty. So My wife could go in there and show him and come out with a 70 after bouncing his hind feet together 4 separate times. So he could do all the hard stuff. He could do enough to like mark a 74, but just had he didn't fall out of lead. He didn't pop out a lead behind. He just got tight running fast and would bounce his hind feet together. And, that's not the correct lead. So it's out of lead as far as NRHA goes. And I could not for the life of me make it any better. I think trying to make it better actually probably made it worse. And so I kind of stepped away from like, okay, you can go in there and, you know, mark a 1 or a 2 easily without going too fast. Just do that. I kind of stepped away from trying to make him any different, but he kind of got me thinking about what else is there? What's going on here? And he kind of got me looking into other ways of doing things with horses. What I used to refer to as crazy cat lady land, like people who are really into relationships with their horses. And, for the most part, when I would see those people in the past, yeah, they loved their horses, but their horses didn't know anything sort of thing. So I didn't think much of, I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about what they do with their horses. I just had a series of different things, but probably the big one was I was at a horse expo in Madison, Wisconsin. And, those horse expos, a lot of times you do an arena session with a horse, but sometimes you do a stand-up talk in front of a crowd in like a lecture hall. And, they always want the title 6 months ahead of time. So I have a title I reserve for that talk that I send in 6 months ahead of time. And it just says everything I learned in life, I learned from horses. So I just basically, and the talk's different every time because from the last time I did it, there's something else that's popped up. And so I went in and I did the talk, whatever. And when I left, I was going back to my booth and I walked past the booth of a lady named Barbara Schulte. I don't know if you know who Barb is. Big time cutter, mental coach. Anyway, Barb said to me, she said, so how'd your talk go? And I said, oh my God, I feel like I've been run over by a truck. I'm exhausted. And she said, why is that? And I said, well, I just admitted stuff to a room full of strangers, things I probably never even told myself before, probably even admitted to myself before. I have no idea where I did it, but I did it, And she said, oh, well, Brene Brown says that vulnerability is the ultimate badass. I'd never heard the name Brene Brown before. So I went back to the booth and I don't know, half an hour later, someone came up to the booth and I was talking to them and they mentioned Brene Brown too. So I'm like, I got to look up this Brene Brown person. I was probably 49 years old and never heard of Brene Brown before. Now I've heard her name mentioned twice in half an hour. So anyway, when I got home from there, I looked up Brene Brown and started listening to some of her audio books. And I was out in the tractor one day doing something, and I had the noise cancelling headphones on. And this one book, she said, you cannot selectively suppress emotions. If you suppress the lower emotions, you also suppress the higher emotions. And as a boy growing up in Australia, you're not supposed to show fear, you're supposed to cry and those sorts of things. And in my family, we didn't really show grief. I remember going to a funeral and my parents would go, well, and they're just worrying about it. He's dead. Onward, sort of thing. And so I got to thinking, I wonder could I experience more joy or happiness or whatever. And so that kind of led me to go on to seeing a therapist, which led me down all sorts of rabbit holes. But probably the horse thing that made the biggest change was sometime after that, I did a clinic in Texas, and there was a Mustang at this clinic, and it was a 3-day clinic. I normally do 2-day clinics, but anyway, it was a 3-day clinic, and I normally have 12 horses, 12 people for a clinic, and I used to have 12 people all day. Then I started doing 6 people for half a day, and now I do 3 people for 2 hours each. It works, actually get more done that way, but this time it was half a day. And I don't remember this horse the first day of the clinic. She did some groundwork with him. But the second day of the clinic, she was on the ground doing something with him. And she said to me, hey, I got a question over here. I'm asking him to disengage, step over behind. But when I go to walk down that side, he blocks me out. So this is a 9-year-old Mustang, been out of the wild for 6 years, been ridden for 6 years. He's very well trained. and he has a random bolting issue. Like every once in a while, he'll bolt. Can't tell when it's coming. You don't know what causes it because it's never the same thing. And it could be something that didn't bother him the day before. So you don't really know. And anyway, so she said, he's blocking me out when I go to walk down beside him. So I said, let me try. So I stood in front of him and I went to walk down his near side. And as I did, he just turned his head and blocked me. And normally, what I would have done, I would have just reached my hand under his jaw, moved his head slowly over, and I would have went down that side. Excuse me, coming down here. I would not have punished him, but I also would not have walked around his head and walked down there because I was at the time I was in the mental place of he who moves his feet first loses. You know, like there's a winner and a loser in this conversation. You know what I mean? But I didn't do that for some reason. I just when he blocked me with his head, I just stepped back to where I had been directly in front of him. So I acknowledged the fact that he said no. I didn't know why he was saying no, and I certainly didn't know why I stepped back to the front there. And I stood there and I waited for him to show me some sign of being a little more relaxed. Like if he's blocked me out, he's obviously said, oh, that concerns me for whatever reason. And I waited till, I don't know, maybe he started to blink a little bit, maybe his ears started to move. It wasn't anything big like a lick and a chew or a sigh, but it was just some little thing. And then I said, okay, I'm going to try it again. And I went to walk down that side and he blocked me. So I stepped back, waited. Anyway, this went on for 5 or 10 minutes. And after 5 or 10 minutes, I go to walk down his side and he lets me. He doesn't block me. So now I'm standing kind of beside his shoulder. And I thought, well, he's been ridden for 6 years. Obviously, you can touch him, no problem. So I reached up my hand. I just went to put my hand on his wither. But I was watching his head and his eyes and his ears and his muzzle and the whole bit. And as I went to put my hand on his wither, he just raised his head up like half an inch, just a little, ooh, what are you doing? And so I took my hand away. And then I went to do it again. And I waited for him to relax again. And I put my hand up. He raised his head up. I put my hand away. And this went back and forth for 5 or 10 minutes. And after 5 or 10 minutes, I can now reach up, put my hand on his wither, and he doesn't raise his head up. He doesn't get concerned. And then I said, okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to disengage him. I'm going to ask him to step over behind. And as I just subtly changed my body posture, over he went, like he was really well trained. And I said to the lady that owned him, I think that, he's 6 years old. You've been doing this for 6 years. He doesn't need to do it anymore. I think he's sick of you disengaging him. Okay? Here, I'll prove it to you. I'm going to go back to the front. And if he lets me come down the side again, I'm going to disengage him. And I'm going to keep doing it. And you watch, he'll start to block me out again. And so I went to the front. I walked down the side. He let me. I asked him to step over. He steps over. I go back to the front. I walk down the side. He lets me. I ask him to step over. He steps over. I go back and forth. I do it like 12 times. And he will not block me out anymore. And so I said to her, okay, that guess was wrong. He's not tired of us disengaging him because I've just done it 12 times in a row and he didn't say no. So I actually have no idea why he was blocking me out, but it's not what I thought. And so I handed the lead rope back to her and she said, what do you want me to do with him now? And I said, I'll just hang out with him, just chill for a while. And I turned and I was helping somebody else in the clinic, and about 10 minutes later, there was this collective gasp from everybody there. And I turned around and this horse has buckled at the knees, dropped to his knees, dropped to his belly. His head is straight up and down in the dirt and he's snoring little dust clouds in the dirt. And then he lay down, had a roll, got up, shook, and then boom, dropped again. And I said to his owner, is that normal? Because as you'd know, if something's normal, it's not a big deal. But if it's not normal, it's a big deal. I said, is that normal? She said, I've seen him lay down once in 6 years. And I'm like, ooh, that's not normal. And he lay down there flat and he slept till lunchtime. That was probably 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning by then. He slept for a couple of hours till lunchtime. Loudspeaker, horses riding around, didn't move. And so I actually had to wake him up to have the next group come in. And so she went out with him. And then the next day she brought him in. Sunday morning she brought him in and she said, what do you want me to do with him? And I said, just hang out, see what he does. She stood there for 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, boom, down he went to sleep, slept for 4 hours, slept till lunchtime, like completely unconscious sleep. We had to wake him up again to leave. And when he went home from there, she said he slept for the next week. And so I knew something big had happened. I had no idea what it was, why it happened, what my part in it was, but I knew something big had happened. What I didn't realize at the time though, so that was probably 2017 maybe. What I didn't realize at the time was that horse was never ever going to bolt ever again. He passed away last year, and I think it had been 7 years, just the listening part.
Nothing but everything regard to listening, and that's a lot.
Yeah.
I'm curious what you had to give up on to be able to do that. Because I'm familiar with the competitive world, and there are not a lot of people that going from that world to using a mousy device and like what was it that allowed you, I don't know if to stay open, what you was needed to leave behind while you were doing that?
Um, I know in the middle of that, like one of the first couple of times I stepped back, I said to the crowd, because, I used to get quite a few spectators at the clinics. I said, I don't know what I'm doing here, but if you bear with me, I, I think I'm onto something, but I don't know what it is. So I probably just had to give up, the idea that I'm right. The thing with that horse that my wife bought, the reining horse, at that point in time, my YouTube channel had, I don't know, 23 or 4 million views, and I'm doing clinics around the world, and every horse leaves better than it came, and the whole bit. So I'm kind of starting to believe, yeah, I know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I think that horse just got me like, because I had always been curious about learning more, but I'd always been learning more about the shaping of behaviors, understanding how to shape behaviors, how understand training, understand horse psychology, understand all that. But it was all from the I want something from this thing. You know what I mean? It was, what I've come to in the last couple of years. There's a saying that I've heard. Oh, excuse me. That is called giving versus trading. So trading is I'm going to do something for you so that you do something for me. Whereas giving is just I'm doing this with no thought of getting anything back from it. And that I think that horse kind of helped me go from the trading to giving type. Yeah, probably to the from the trading to the giving type thing.
Wow. And you spoke about lessons you learned from horses. I'm curious, like, what are those lessons that you
Oh,
take from horses to life?
that's my
And then
next book.
maybe the way back from life to horses.
Yeah, that's my next book. Well, it was, I had been doing that talk for oh, at least 10 years by. Oh, no, it wouldn't be 10 years by then. Probably 5 or 6 years by then, but I probably have to do it a couple of times a year, and it's not scripted, so it's just a title. Everything I learned in life I learned from horses, and I start talking about, you know, different things different life skills that I've learned from horses. So it never really was a scripted thing. It was just a title to give me an excuse to run my mouth for an hour in front of a crowd of people.
But in a way, it's kind of allow you to observe that. Like it's made you to stop and to look about those ideas.
Uh, yeah, I don't think the talk did that because I think I stop and think about those things a lot anyway. But it was just a title that I used to fill in that blank. But that one in Madison, Wisconsin, I think that was 2017. Um, what was interesting was I had the horse expo, and then I did a clinic. I stayed back east, and I did a clinic midweek in Wisconsin or Minnesota or one of those cold places back there. Uh, in the middle of the week, and some really interesting things happened at that clinic. I was starting to look at things. This is before the Mustang, by the way. Um, and then I did a clinic the next weekend back in Wisconsin. And we did the clinic the first day, and we went to dinner that night, uh, everybody from the clinic. And then there was a guy who, I don't know if he's in the clinic, but I knew him. But anyway, he lived not far from there. And he said, "Oh, let's go back to my place. We'll have a couple of drinks or whatever." And so a few of us went back there, and I ended up sitting around talking to him and these two British girls. And I don't know what it was, but one of them asked a question that kind of rocked me. And then I answered that. And the next one asked a question that kind of rocked me. And then I answered that. And then he asked me a question that kind of rocked me. And it kind of did a couple of rounds of this. And I don't know what, I don't even remember what the questions were, what was said, but it put a crack in my armor, and it was the weirdest thing. The whole room, like the world tilted on its axis, the whole room kind of went like that for, I don't know if it was 5 seconds or 30 seconds, but I just burst out crying. I'm like, who the hell are you people and what planet are you from? And then I started asking myself, when did you set this up? They're like, set what up? Like, well, her to ask that question and then me to answer and then you ask that. And like, we didn't set anything up. But it brought me undone. And it's kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like my whole perception of the world crumbled without me knowing when it crumbled too. But and I ended up staying there that night. I didn't even go back to the hotel. I remember I got up the next morning and I said to the guy, I said, I can't do this clinic. I don't even know who I am right now. How can I go? But I did. Um, but yeah, that was, then I think it was after, well, I got back from there and I started listening to Brene Brown. But Brene Brown talks about, she says, yes, when I had my spiritual awakening, well, no, when I had my nervous breakdown, my therapist called it a spiritual awakening. I called it a nervous breakdown. I'm like, yeah, I think that's whatever that was one of those. And it came from that talk I did at that horse expo where I just spat stuff out that I probably, like I said, I probably admitted to a room of a couple of hundred strangers things I'd never admitted to myself before, including and I remember I told a story about the autistic girl from Finland. She's from in that thing, and it probably at the time I hadn't even realized that her comments to me had made me think about something different. They were kind of just offhanded comments, but they really made me think about something different. And I probably hadn't put two and two together till I actually said it in that talk.
And do you think it's reshape your identity, or right now you kind of working from a different place? I don't know if without identity, but
Um, well, I think, I went to a retreat thing last year, and they had to split up into groups of two, and they had these questions to ask each other. And one of the questions was, who do you no longer pretend to be? And it was, and I think these happenings along the way kind of got me to where I was being more authentic and not being something I wasn't to, impress somebody else or whatever, you know what I mean? So I think I started to be a little more me, and then, going to therapy and all those sorts of things, um, you start to realize the parts of you that, were kind of conditioned into you as a young person, whatever, that aren't really you. They're your parents' ideas of what you should be, or the society's idea, your school teacher's idea, whatever. And you start to kind of let those things drop off. And
how
yeah.
therapy affects your way of working with horses? Because it seems like first it's coming 3 times, maybe it's a pattern, but it seems like it was important for you. You're describing two major things. First is studies or inspiration, and we're gonna elaborate on that later. And the other thing is the therapy or the process that you did with yourself.
So sorry, what was your question?
How the therapy, the fact that you was under therapy affected your ideas or your way of working with horses.
Oh, you know what? So I 2018 was when I started going to therapy, and I took the year off from doing clinics because I was going to write my book, and I was going to uh, get qualified, try to qualify for the World Equestrian Games in the reining. And so I can't be gone all the time and keep the reining horses going, you know. Um, and so that was the year I also started going to therapy, which was pretty interesting. But the there I was going to group and individual therapy, so I was going twice a week. Um, and the group therapy was at like on a Tuesday night or something. I used to have to drive an hour each way to go to this thing. And we used to have homework every week. So the type of, I ended up doing the wrong type of therapy, actually. The therapy I did was called dialectical, someone suggested it to me, but it was called dialectical behavior therapy. And DBT was, I think it was initially created to help highly suicidal adults, but uh, nowadays it's good for anybody with emotional regulation issues. And that was why it was the wrong therapy for me, because it turns out you actually have to have some emotions for that therapy to work. I was pretty emotionless. And so, like we had homework every week, but I would never do the homework because I wouldn't, I'm at home. I don't have a boss. I don't have co-workers. I don't have any problems. There's no one for me to get angry at, upset, or whatever at. So I never really got to do much of the homework. But the homework each week, one of the homeworks was always a mindfulness practice. And what's really interesting is one of the mindfulness practices was closely observe an animal. Uh, it's like if your cat is laying in the windowsill and the sun's shining through, look at each individual hair that the sun is shining on your cat, sort of thing. It's like, I can do that with a horse all day. So, but one of the homeworks was counting judgmental thoughts. And they said, so what we want you to do is we're going to count judgmental thoughts. They said, actually, what we're going to do right now, we're going to go around the room. Each of you, I want you to identify 3 things in the room. And I had not, everybody else there, I think, had done this before. I hadn't. And so it got to me, and I said, that's a chair, that's a door, that's a funny looking lamp. And everybody in the room jumped up and pointed at me and said, judgment. I'm like, what? And they said, you said that was a funny looking lamp. That's a judgment. It's a lamp. I'm like, oh, didn't even realize I said that. And so your homework for the week was to get like one of those little clicker things like the bus conductors or a bouncer or some nightclub doorman has, or whatever, but something to keep track of things. And when you notice yourself having a judgmental thought, click that, or maybe put some rocks in one pocket and take your rock out, put it in the other pocket when you have a judgmental thought. And I thought, well, I'll only need 3 rocks. I'll have 3 judgmental thoughts all day, and I'll start at the morning with 3 rocks in this pocket, and at the end of the day, I'll have 3 rocks in this pocket. I had 21 before breakfast the first day. And the thing about judgmental thoughts, or being aware of your judgmental thoughts, you become aware of how many you have, but I think you also become aware of how many you have about yourself, which kind of leads me back to Brene Brown. So Brene is she ended up being a shame researcher, but she thinks that shame is the scourge of society. And she said there's a difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is a focus on behavior and shame is a focus on self. So if you did something a bit, that you probably shouldn't have done, guilt would be, oh, I just did something stupid. Shame would be, I am stupid. So guilt, I did something stupid. That means, well, I could do it differently next time. Shame, I am stupid. That kind of sinks into your soul. And so once I become aware of judgmental thoughts, you become aware of how many you have about yourself, beating yourself up about stuff, and then you get to change it from shame to guilt instead of like, oh, you're such a dickhead. You don't say that. You go, no, no, you're not a dickhead. That was a bit of a silly move, but you yourself are fine. That was just something you shouldn't have done, but you're a good person. That sort of thing. And I, when I first started back doing clinics later that year, must have been after the World Aggression Games, I was gone to New Zealand and I was in an airport and I'm walking through an airport and I people watch in airports. Everybody's walking the other way. I look at that person, look at that person. But what I realized was I'm not looking at them thinking about the best thing about them. I'm looking about them thinking about the worst thing about them. Like, did you even look in the mirror before you left the house this morning? What do you need to put some clothes on, girl. You need to stay away from the hamburger stand. You get too many clothes. You're too tall, you're too short, you're too fat, you're too skinny. And it was constant. And I realized it's always been there. But I've just never known it was there. And so I'm walking along, I'm like, okay, let's stop that. And so what I started doing was everybody walking the other way, walking past me the other way, I would look them in the eye, give them a little eye smile, and think to myself, may you be happy. So I'm walking through the airport. May you be happy. May you be happy. May you be happy. May you be happy. Most people won't look you in the eye. Some people do look in the eye and then look the other way. But some people look you in the eye. You look them in the eye. You give them a little eye smile, and they give you a little eye smile back, and it's this little exchange of good vibes. Then you're walking through the airport. I get to my gate, and when I get there, I realize I have this light, airy feeling inside me that I don't normally have. And then I realized, oh, because my normal is kind of a heavy, dark sort of an energy. But when it's your normal, you don't even know it's heavy or dark. It's just normal. But then I felt this, like this light, joyous sort of energy. And then I realized, oh, I've been going through life being very judgmental about stuff. So anyway, I go to this horse expo. And most of the time at horse expos, I'll recruit a horse on the ground that's got some sort of anxiety that usually comes in dragging their owner around. And I let them drag them around for a while I explain what I'm going to do. Then I take over and usually I do some things and the horse is different. Well, this is a 4-year-old dressage horse, I think, comes in and he's dragging this lady all over the place and pushing into her and dragging here and dragging there. Anyway, I kind of explained to the crowd what I was going to be doing. That takes 15, 20 minutes, whatever. And then I said, okay, bring him over here. And she brought him over and handed me the lead rope. And as she handed me the lead rope, normally there's something I would do with the horse. She hands me the lead rope and he's been dragging all over the place and jumping up and down and leaping and doing all sorts of things. She brings him over to me. She hands him the lead rope. And as she does, he just comes up and puts his nose on my belly, like on my belly button, like just comes over and kind of stands there. And the crowd was kind of like, whoa. And I said to everybody, I have no idea what just happened right then. That's not really happened before. Normally I have to have some sort of interaction with the horse to get him to settle down. I said, but I can give you some ideas as to why I think that may have happened. But the first thing I said I want to tell you guys is I didn't do anything. It wasn't like she walked up to me with a horse and I projected my chi towards him. I didn't do anything. Okay. I was the same before she walked over here than when she was. I didn't do anything to the horse. But then I went on to tell this whole crowd, like, I spent the last 12 months going to therapy twice a week. And I know that I've had some internal changes, which I think is part of my internal energy. And I said, I feel like my energy right now is completely different. And it was almost like the airport, I think. Instead of me looking at this horse like, another bloody warm blood idiot, or whatever, there wasn't any of that. All I saw was a horse in distress. And all I felt was kind of empathy for the horse. There wasn't any judgmental about the lady or the horse or the whatever. So I think the therapy did quite a bit of that. And what was interesting in the therapy is, the same rules apply for horses. One of the chapters in my book is create a tool before you use a tool. Um, for the people at the therapy who have, emotional regulation issues, they're supposed to practice their homework before they actually have a problem. So work on that skill before you need to use that skill. And so I was like, yeah, that's how I train horses. Yeah, there was a lot of horse training stuff in there, but yeah, really got me. I think it really changed like my internal energy. Another thing that happened that year too, we got qualified for the World Equestrian Games, and a friend of ours from New Zealand, Jane Pike, is an equestrian mindset coach, and so we had Jane coach us, and she actually came to the World Equestrian Games with us. Um, and earlier in the year, probably about April or May, um, Jane had my wife, but my wife was on the team too. We both had a conversation with Jane on the phone separately from each other, and she asked us some questions, and then she sent us an audio track to listen to. She said, "I want you to listen to this with stereo headphones as often as you can." It was about half an hour long, and so I'd listen to it, and it starts out, Jane is talking in both ears. She's chatting away. And then about 10 minutes in, one of those Janes keeps chatting and a different Jane shows up over here and he's talking about something totally different. And so sometimes you listen to this one, sometimes you listen to the left one, sometimes you're kind of trying to listen to both of them, sometimes you just zone out. Okay. And I listened to it, that year. We went to the World Equestrian Games, and we're not expecting to, be superstars or anything. My wife and I are both riding our own horses, who are the only horses there with bite marks on them because they live in a pasture together. And our chef de quip, he had said, "What do you think you guys can mark on these horses?" Because the last two World Equestrian Games, it took this for the team this number of points to get the team bronze medal. We're kind of going that. And the two other members of the team, Martin Larkham and his sister Shauna, they're superstars, and we expect them to have pretty big scores. And I said, probably, I reckon if everything goes well, a 2:17.5 will pull us up. And my wife said, yeah, about the same. So we compete in the first round, and I'm a 2:17 and she's a 2:18. And so we do about as good as we think we can do. But the weird thing was, I was completely relaxed. I've never been that relaxed showing a horse in my entire life. There was no pressure at all. You're riding for your country. They're supposed to be, your ass cheeks are supposed to be clamped tight, whatever. I'd never been that present competing ever. I don't think ever. It was just like I was in the zone. Time slowed down. I was present. And it was interesting. And so at the World Equestrian Games, you'd know this, but explain to your listeners, the World Equestrian Games, the first round is the team competition. So everybody competes, and then each team's score gets added up, and that's, it's the team medals. And then they have an individual finals, which has the individual medals, and there's 20 in that finals. And so the top 15 automatically go to the finals, and then 16 through 35, they go in a semi-final, and the top 5 of those go back to the individual final. Well, I scraped in 35th place for the semi-finals. And so I went back, 2 days later, did the semi-finals. I'm at 2:20.5. I'm 3 points higher than I was the first time, and I'm certainly higher than I thought I could be on this horse. And then my wife goes in and she's at 2:20.5. But once again, it was just so peaceful and so quiet, and there was no noise in my head, and it was like I was the most relaxed I'd ever been competing. And after I came out of there, I was like, something was different. What was it? And then I realized, something was missing. It wasn't that something that was there. Something was missing. And I realized that every time I've competed, you have your horse ready, you know what your horse can do, you know what you can do. I mean, you don't go and show your horse if you don't think they can do the maneuvers. But what I realized was, every time I've ever competed, in the back of my head somewhere, below the radar, was this voice. It's like, who do you think you are? What do you think you're doing? You're not good enough to do this. People are going to laugh at you. Which I never ever realized it was there until it wasn't there. And when it wasn't there, it was a big difference. So it's almost like at the airport, the judging people, like too fat, too short, too, whatever. Um, so I mentioned it to Jane, and she said, "Oh, well, that audio thing I gave you, that's a hypnosis thing. So the ear that you're listening to, that goes in your conscious brain, but the other one that you're not listening to goes into your subconscious." And yeah, so the therapy plus that really had me in a completely different mindset. But I also realized that's the last time I competed was at the World Equestrian Games. Um, when I was there, I realized, you know what? I realized that I actually don't like competing. I've only ever been competing for external validation. Like if I can win something, that person over there or that trainer or this person or my client or whatever will think more of me. And, and at the World Equestrian Games, I was kind of like, I don't, I don't need other people's opinions for me to like myself, at least anymore. I think I used to. Um, and so, yeah, haven't competed since.
Do you think it's useful, like, to go there to achieve that? And I'm kind of curious because not the World Equestrian Game, but like once I was 18 years old, and then I took the second in the Open in Israel, and suddenly it was I don't care. Like I proved to myself that it's doable, that I'm good enough, and then it was the same. Like I didn't have the urge to show.
Mm. Yeah, I don't know. I think. Well, I think one of the most one of the best things you can do in life is to unravel your motivation for the things that you do. Like come to an understanding of why do you do the things you do. Because I feel like a lot of people do things and don't even realize that they're doing it for not a healthy reason. They're doing it because well, whatever. A lot of times it goes back to childhood stuff. Maybe my dad didn't pay enough attention to me, so I want to do all this stuff, so maybe he'll think more of me, or whatever. And so, yeah, these days I'm probably less impressed with people who achieve big things until I find out why they achieve them. And if they achieve them because they are testing themselves, that's one thing. But if they achieve them because, whatever, yeah, I feel like if you can come to grips and understand why you do things, like in the reining, some of the really best guys in the world in the reining, some of them, I think, have really got it together personally, and others are doing it because they're doing it because they don't feel enough, and they're going to try to win and win and win. You know, um, and I don't really think negatively of them, but I often wonder, do you know why you apply yourself so much? You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's interesting, but I do feel like getting to the root of why you do things really is an important thing to do in life.
Let's lead me to the next question about spirituality or God, or what is that part in your journey with horses and
I would have to say that. Well, I'm going to tell you another bit of a story here. After I'd spent that whole year uh, doing therapy, group and individual therapy, and I stopped going because I realized it wasn't for me because I wasn't getting. I did learn quite a bit of stuff out of it, but probably they weren't the things I went there for, even though they were really good. It was more about the emotion stuff, and so I was in Australia doing some clinics, and I was driving around, and I usually listen to audiobooks, and I was listening to an audiobook by Tim Ferriss. And what Tim had done, Tim has a podcast, and he has like 300 episodes on his podcast or something or other. But everybody he talked to at the end of the podcast, he asked them, so what three things do you feel are really important to you? And so then out of all those three things and those 300 people, he combined them all and like, what's the most common thing? And so he wrote a book called Game Changers, I think it was called. And there was like 12 or 14 chapters or something, but these were the top 14 most common things. And the first one was a meditation practice. And then it went down the line, but probably halfway through the book, he was talking about there's a doctor in Silicon Valley who will pull fat out of you, spin off your stem cells and inject them into your joints. So, no, not Tim Ferriss, sorry, Dave Asprey. Sorry, the Bulletproof Coffee guy. There it is, there, Game Changers, yeah. Not Tim Ferriss. Anyway, Dave Asprey had been morbidly obese for most of his life and spent a lot of time working out, trying to get rid of the weight, and his joints were all jacked up. Anyway, he said, I've had my joints all injected with my stem cells. He says, I feel like I'm 18 again. And he said, but the other thing this doctor will do is he will pull fat out of you, spin off your stem cells and inject them into your vagus nerve in a procedure he calls a stellate ganglion block. And it will give you a complete emotional reset back to factory settings. And I'm like, you mean I don't have to drive an hour each way twice a week to go to therapy? I mean, I can just go to a doctor. We live in Silicon Valley. I can just go to a doctor and have it done. And so I got home and I made an appointment. So you got to make an appointment for a phone consult before. And so I talked to this guy for an hour on the phone, and he asked lots of questions, and I told him, excuse me, that I wanted to do this stellate ganglion block thing. And he said, well, based on what you've told me, I'm not going to do that. There's something else I'm going to do for you. I'm like, okay. So I make an appointment. I go in there, and they take me into a room, and they hook me up to an IV, and they give me an IV of something called NAD. NAD is cofactor, whatever that is, but it's got something to do with your gut, heart, brain, neural pathway. You've got as many neurons in your heart as you do in your brain, and I think you've got as many in your gut as you do in your brain too. So it's supposed to help reconnect all that sort of thing. And I think I spent 4.5 hours on this drip. It's got to go in really slowly. But then they get done with that. Then the doctor comes in and gives me a ketamine trip. I'd never had anything to do with psychedelics before. Didn't know anything about them. And he came in and he gave me a ketamine trip. And he said, so what'll happen is, and the ketamine trip is, you're asking about God and spirituality. The ketamine trip's like, oh, there's more to it than this dimension, okay? There are other dimensions. But he said, so what'll happen is your nervous system will go offline for 8 hours and then it'll kick back in. And so that was about 4:00 one afternoon. Went home. My wife was with me in the room when I had it, actually. Went home, woke up the next morning, which is, 14 hours later. And my wife says, how do you feel? I said, no different. That was another bust, So that day I was flying to Washington State to a horse expo. So I was in the airport in San Jose at 3:00 the next afternoon. And I'm sitting there waiting for my plane. And all of a sudden, I felt like Sigourney Weaver in Alien. I felt like there was an alien inside my body. There was this energy so I've had heartbreak, being in love, and then in the pit of my stomach, fear and dread. But I'd never had anything in my solar plexus. I'd never felt anything in there before. And I've got this alien entity inside my solar plexus moving around here and there. And I talk to people, and if they say nice things, it does one thing. And, I was like, oh, is this what feelings is called? I've never had these before. And what was really interesting was the horse expo. In that county, everybody takes their dogs everywhere. So normally I go to a horse expo and I miss my dogs, and every once in a while I'll see a dog, I've got to go say hi. Everybody's leading the dog around. But I was in my booth sitting behind the desk, and there was a lady there with a cat. on a harness, on a leash. The cat had a harness and a leash on. And she's walking past my booth, and that cat stops and looks at me and makes a beeline for me, jumps up on the table, jumps in my lap, sucks up against my abdomen, and won't get up. So I talked to this lady for 45 minutes, and finally she's got to go, and she's got to pick the cat up by the scruff of the neck. And I asked her, has he ever done that? She said, nope, never. And I've never had it happen before. But this is the day after the ketamine trip. And I've got these energies inside my body going around. I'm like, so like, so I've never had anything to do with psychedelics before. Wasn't looking for psychedelics. The doctor gave it to me. Then I'm experiencing energies inside my body I've never experienced before. And then a cat is attracted to it and sucks up against it. And so that was, you're talking about spirituality and God and things like that make you realize, oh, there's so much more to what's going on in the world than we know. And then because of that, because of the ketamine, then I've actually, sought out psychedelics in a healing sense a number of times since, different ones. And yeah, those things you will experience other dimensions and other worlds, and it'll just make you realize that this 3D world that we live in is not just all there is.
I have a question about something that you said before regard to like your why or the move, and maybe it's related also to the belly thing, but why are you doing what you are doing in the world? And what is the purpose of it? Or
Okay, so somewhere around this, it was after, I can't remember, but my wife had been going to organize this retreat with these three other women over in Santa Cruz. And they went over there to sit down and kind of talk about how they were going to do this retreat. And one of them said, well, before we do this retreat, we need to talk to Denise first. And Robin said, Denise? Who's Denise? And she said, you don't know Denise? And Robin's like, no. And she's like, oh, Denise is my astrologer. And so my wife kind of rolls her eyes like, yeah, whatever. She says, no, we need to go see Denise. So they go to see Denise, and all three of them have to give Denise their date of birth, place of birth, time of birth. And Denise reads the charts for the three of them in relation to the weekend they're going to have the retreat to tell them who should do what role. And Robin said, the roles that she said I should do, those are my strengths. Those are my, Robin spent 25 years in human resources, and there's certain skills she has, and this lady didn't know her. That's the role. Anyway, so then my wife decided she was going to do a single, a personal thing with this lady. And I was away in Australia doing some clinics at the time. Anyway, that night I called my Robin and she said, oh, I went and saw an astrologer today. And I said, you did what? She said, yeah, I went and saw an astrologer. And it's amazing. She records the audio. You should listen to it when you come home. So when I got home, I listened to it. And I'm like, wow, she can tell, she knows a lot about you. I want to go. So I got the lady's phone number and I made an appointment. So we go over and see her. And about this point in time, it's a number of years into me doing things differently. My YouTube channel's got 25 or 6 million views. I don't know, something like that. But I've been very open about what I'm interested in, where I'm going to, and how I think horses relate to that sort of thing. Anyway, so I go there and we sit down. She starts reading my charts and she's like, this is really interesting. Wow. Wow, you don't see this very often. Whoa, wow. And I said, what? She goes, your charts tell me. So think about this. I've got like 26 million views on my YouTube channel. People are interested going down this rabbit hole that I'm going down, whatever. So this lady says, your charts tell me that from your moment of birth, your whole purpose here on this planet has been to gather hundreds of thousands of people and lead them towards consciousness. And I'm like, whoa, that's pretty heavy. But I'm thinking, that's kind of what's going on. Holy shit, you know. So by the time I left there, she kind of had me convinced that that's what was going on. But then the voice kicks in, doesn't it? Then I started like, that's not you. She's full of crap. You know, my name, if you Google me, there's only one person in the world with my first and last name. Okay, I have an interesting first name, and that combined with my last name. There's no two people in the world with that name. So I'm like, she just Googled me. She's full of shit. She's a charlatan. So I kind of wrote it off. And I don't know if you know this, but if the universe sends you a sign and you don't listen, it will send you another sign, one that you will listen to. And so a few months later, I was doing some clinics in Michigan. And I'm not a urban dweller. I'm a country boy. I don't like urban environments. I don't know the rules. You know, I have a lot of common sense when it comes to horses and livestock or whatever. Don't have a lot of common sense in scary urban environments. Anyway, I'm going to Michigan, and I know that the two most dangerous cities in America are in Michigan, Detroit, Michigan, and Flint, Michigan. I'm not in either of those two, but it's still a dangerous place. So I do these two clinics back to back, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Sunday night, I go to dinner with the organizer of the clinic, and we spend quite a bit of time at dinner. We probably don't leave the restaurant till 10:30, quarter to 11. And I've got, 45-minute drive back to the hotel. I've got an early morning flight, and it's 2 hours from the hotel to the airport. And I'm trying to figure out what time I got to get up. I'm going to have to get up at like 3:30 or something in the morning. And then I realized, oh, I've got to fill the rental car up with gas too. I might do that tonight on the way back to the hotel. So I'm driving around looking for a gas station, and I'm in this like rundown industrial neighborhood on the edge of the city. And I pull into this gas station, and there's a group of late teen, early 20-year-old African American youths loitering around with their pants hanging down really saggy. And I'm like, scary. So I pull up, I jump out, I swipe my card, I get the, the gas pump, and I want go to open the gas cap on the car, and I can't get it to open. I'm like, shit, shit, shit. Is it the keys? And I'm unlocking the keys. That's not it. And I get in the car, I'm trying to find the little thing to pull, but it's dark and I can't see. And I'm like, screw it, I'm out of here. So I just put the handle back, I press cancel, and I jump in the car, start the car. Now I'm wearing a button-down shirt, a bowl cap. I'm driving a small, like a compact rental car. So there's not much you can tell about me from by look. So I start the car, and as I go to pull forward, there's a on the window right here. And I turn and I look, and there's this African American dude right there with his face right up against the window, and he's got like a big neck tattoo, and he's got a bit of skin off one cheek or something or other. Anyway, I'm like, shit. And I turn and I look at him. And as I look at him, he kind of steps back and puts his hands up in the air like this. And he says something along the lines of, sorry, mister, I hope I didn't scare you. Something like that. And he looks kind of urban ghetto-ish, but his voice sounds southern and educated. And so the words he said and the look he has don't add up. And I'm like, what? And I stop at the car. I stop the car, and I put the car in park, I think. And I roll the window down just an inch or two. And I said, can I help you? And he says, I'm really, really sorry, sir. I hope I didn't scare you. He says, can I just tell you my story? He says, I'm a gospel singer from Alabama, and I do a lot of volunteer work. And he says, I have a degree in religious studies from such and such Baptist University. And he said, I do a lot of volunteer work, and I came up here to help build a church. And there was some miscommunication. I got up here, and there's not even a church being built. And I've been sleeping rough for a couple of nights. And he said, I have some money, but I just need $19 more to get a room. And he says, you're probably going to say, why don't you go to a hostel? He says, because I don't have a Michigan driver's license, and I'm just tired. And so by this point in time, the dude sounds legit, you know. So I turn the car off, and I roll the window down. And I reach out, and I put my hand out, and I said, hey, I'm Warwick. And he reaches out and he shakes hands with me, and I cannot for the life of me remember what his name is. But as we're shaking hands, he starts to sing. And he is a gospel singer from Alabama. His voice fills up this whole gas station at 11:30 at night or whatever. And so now we're not shaking hands, we're just holding hands. We're holding hands through the window. I'm looking him in the eye. He's looking me in the eye. Doesn't feel weird. We're just holding hands. And he sings this song, and he takes his time too. And he finishes this song, then he draws breath, and we're still holding hands, and then he starts to pray. So now he's praying. We're still holding hands. We're still looking at each other in the eye. And the song and the prayer must have gone on for 5 to 7 minutes. I don't know, but that's a long time to hold a stranger's hand and look him in the eye without it feeling weird. And then he stops praying and he looks at me and he kind of gets this look on his face and he goes, I don't know what you do for a living, mister, but your whole purpose here on this planet is to lead, to gather millions of people and lead them towards God. Then he leans forward and he says, but the only thing holding you back is your fear. And I'm like, shit, you got me in one, didn't you? And so I ended up giving him $100 and telling him get some rest and get some food and whatever. And I drove out of there and I pulled out of there and I drove half a block down the street and I pulled over. So my wife goes to bed pretty early and she would have been asleep already, so I can't call her. My son was living in Hawaii, so that's like, 6 hours, 5 hours earlier than that. So I texted him what happened. And then I drive back to the hotel. I go and get in the hotel, I get on the bed and I call him. And he answers and he goes, Dad, what's this gibberish you just texted me? And so I tell him the whole story and he goes, oh, well, that's exactly what you texted me. So, those stories, that was probably 7 years ago now, maybe 8 years ago now. But, as you tell a story often enough, it changes over time. And so you lose the original story. We've still got the text that I sent him. And that's exactly how I said it went down. And so when you ask me, what is my purpose? I think that's it.
Some horses are, or the way of consciousness communication with horses is a way to lead people towards God.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't think it's my job to, the astrologer, she said, your whole purpose has been to gather hundreds of thousands of people and lead them towards consciousness, not to consciousness, just towards. And he said the same thing, towards. And so I don't feel like it. I do, I have a podcast, I do clinics, I have an online video library, I do demos at horse expos, I do master classes, we have a podcast summit. But I'd say in everything I do, the reason behind the doing it, let's say I just did a masterclass in Australia a couple of weeks ago. My reason behind doing it is in everything I do, what I want to do is crack open someone's long-held belief. Because I feel like that's what happened to me that night in Wisconsin when those people were asking me those questions. It just cracked a long-held belief I had about whatever. I don't even know what it was at this point in time. And so with the horses, a lot of times people think horses are whatever they think the horses are. And so with the horse stuff, I try to, like I'm going to Idaho next weekend for a horse expo. I usually try to recruit horses that people have problems with and then show them that there's a different way of solving the problems when you look at horses from a different perspective. And so what I want to do is I want to crack one of their long-held truths. And a lot of times with horses, the long-held truth is, you have to actually teach them how to do something. They're not going to offer to do it, sort of thing. And so I feel like that's what I like to do in all my endeavors with whatever I'm doing, is crack someone's long-held belief. And then what that does, I feel like it opens them up to explore stuff on their own. I don't need to be around for it. I feel like I'm just I feel like my job is to kind of stand at the door and kind of go, hey, come and have a look down here. Like when I first started doing things differently, I had a lot of, millions and, probably 18, 19 million views or something on my YouTube channel. Maybe 15, somewhere in there. But, a lot of people thought that I was legit. Like, yeah, this guy knows what he's talking about. Whatever. And then when I started going down this other path, I didn't just go crazy down this path. I just started down this path. And people were like, well, if he thinks it's interesting, maybe I could have a look. And I really feel like that's what my purpose is to be mainstream enough for people to think I'm legit, but then also be at the doorway and go, hey, I've been looking at this stuff over here and it's pretty interesting. And they kind of go, well, if you think it's interesting, I'll have a look. I probably wouldn't have gone there myself, but if you think it's, I really feel kind of like that's what my
I'm curious about the
purpose is.
how because
The what?
like the how process of it. Like everyone have his own bliss or gift that he's bringing that into his work or into his life, even without people are conscious of that. For example, I have a gift of asking questions. I'm never running out of questions. I can do questions all day long and they will be good questions. But I'm asking about the process because I'm curious if you are aware of that process. First, you said to be legit or in a way start from a legit place. And then,
Yeah, and the word legit kind of means, oh yeah, he's handy and it works. Like you know, I've tried, but he said, yeah, it seems to work. He understands horses. That was kind of the starting point.
so, so do you know what is the process that you are moving the people through while they are interacting with you in that regard? To ask that questions or to come to this place? Because a lot of people can bring with the gospel and then to feel, I don't know, rejection or like people are kind of hard about change and beliefs and all of that.
Well, that's the I think this is where the horses come in, isn't it? People are passionate about their horses and they want to get along better with their horses and they're looking for ways to get along better with their horses. They're not looking for spiritual enlightenment and they're not looking for a lot of things. They want to get along better with their horses. But I feel like helping them with their horses in a certain way tends to lead them in that direction. Especially when you can get, that most people with horse problems, they like, oh, my horse this, my horse that. And a lot of times it has to do with just their perception of what's going on. And when they change their perception about what the horse is doing, and most of the time they think the horse is doing something, they're focused on the fact they don't want the horse to do it. So they want something to get the horse to not do it rather than they're not focused on why does the horse feel that most of these behaviors are going to come from a lack of feeling safe. Um, and a lot of times, this is where it's almost like equine assisted therapy sort of thing. A lot of times, say with that Mustang, okay, when people see the huge change that happens when you listen to the horse instead of telling the horse or asking the horse, but listen to them. And I've had people actually say at clinics, you know what? I just realized I've never been listened to. You know, things like that. The horses kind of help them. They'd never thought about that before, but when their horse now acts completely different, when it gets listened to, they can sometimes draw some parallels to their own life.
So in a way, who I'm supposed to, or how can I be a better listener? And that's why I'm asking you, like, if someone is listening to you and want to be a better listening after that, what is the way to go about it? Practice-wise, with horses, without horses, but
I read a book a few years ago called it's by a British guy named Charles Foster. And the book was called Being a Human: Adventures in 100,000 Years of Consciousness. And in that book, he was living he was living in the forest in the north of England, like a hunter gatherer. So he was, you know, living under pieces of bark. He was eating berries and things like that. Um, one time he went 9 days without eating anything, and when he did eat something, he ate a hedgehog. But he said, when you go 9 days without eating, you have visions, like shamanic type visions, and when you eat 3 meals a day, that doesn't happen. But anyway, in that book, he was talking about the trees, and he said, you know what? I've never really seen a tree. As a matter of fact, it's been a long time since I've seen anything. Because I'm a trained naturalist. So when I look at a tree, I don't see the tree. I see the the species of the tree. I see the genus of the tree. I know what birds live in the tree. I know what bugs live in the tree. I know whether the tree is deciduous or not. I know how its root system works and whether it's a collaborative type tree that sends energy to other trees, or it's like a black walnut and it tries to kill other trees. And, I know how to interact with the mycelium. And because I know all these facts, I don't really see the tree. He said, I once met a man who could see a tree, and he scared me so much, I fled that temple, hitchhiked back to Kathmandu, and took the first plane back to Heathrow. And the reason I tell you that story is I feel like that horse in New Zealand, which was the first horse I'd worked with at a horse expo where I didn't do anything. She brought the horse up to me and the horse went, hey, how's it going? And I feel like that a big part of listening is being non-judgmental, not having an opinion one way or the other, not projecting what you think it is, and any of those things. It's just, you just see the tree or you just see the horse. And a lot of times I think with people, when they see a horse, they see their hopes and their dreams and they want, they want. They don't. So there's an energy to that. You know what I mean? So I really feel like a big part of the listening is kind of being open to the experience without having any set parameters on what you feel the experience should be, or how they should respond, or what you think they are or are going to do, are or aren't going to do, and all those sorts of things. But it's the seeing a tree thing. I think seeing a horse makes a huge difference, and that, I think that just comes from quite a bit of non-judgmental practice.
What you are doing in your life to be in that practice, like what type of practices?
Well, you know what? I'm like everybody else. I do something till it works, then I stop doing it, and then I fall out of I fall out of the practice, and then life turns to crap, and then you got to go back and you got to. Um, I'm kind of at the moment. I'm in the I'm at the not any no practice, need to get started. I used to meditate. I used to do ice baths every day. I used to do all sorts of things, and they work. But the trouble is, when they work, oh, I don't need to do them anymore. And then, the thing set in again. So, as far as with the horses, I don't know. I don't really need a practice anymore. Well, you know what? Speaking of trees, I suppose a practice that I do have is when I look at a tree, I kind of give it a bit of an eye smile, like in the airport. I'm like, hey, dude, how's it going? I really like to think of trees as sentient beings who can't move. They can sway a little bit, but they can't move, but they're conscious. And they sit there and they just got to sit there and watch everybody go by. And they can't join the games. They can't do the stuff. They're just there. Um, and I feel like doing things like that make it easy with the horses. You know what I mean? But for me, that's just a bit of a mindfulness practice, because I can be in my head like anybody else can. But we've got lots of trees here, and so I try to, hey, how's it going? If I'm riding a horse or something and I go past a tree, excuse me, and the branches are kind of moving a little bit, I just think that the tree's going, "Hey, dude, how's it going?" I'm like, "Hey, how's it going?" Yeah, I think little things like that are quite helpful. I was in Bali a couple of years ago, and Indonesia is mostly Muslim, but Bali is Hindu, and the Hindus are animists, and so they believe every solid object has a spirit, and they interact with it that way, and they're a totally different human. Like they're just so smiley and they have this really light energy about them, and they're always making offerings to all the temples and whatever. But yeah, they interact with the world like everything is a sentient being. And yeah, it's just an interesting way of doing it. It's pretty cool.
Like life are sacred. When I was in Arizona, one of the therapists over there, she was extremely from a native tradition and extremely connected. And all of the time when I was dealing with challenges, he said, just pray, like, but it's simple for her. She talking to every room she enter in. She talking to any plant that she see. Like
Hmm.
the immediate response is, and even if you have I don't know if it's the knowledge, but like the skill to connect, you need to remember to do it. And what you are saying about those three, if I need to take something out of it, it's kind of live your life as a ceremony in a way.
Mm.
And the other thing that I'm taking is the mission of the place that I was is to teach the world to love more and fear less. And I
Mm.
think the meeting the world with all of yourself or with emotion, that's another part of it. Like you coming and you are doing studies. Like all of the time you're speaking about that book and that person and like you are kind of in a continued education mode.
Yeah, I mean, but it's curiosity though. It doesn't come from a place of lack. Like, oh, I should know more. It doesn't come from there. It comes from, I'm just curious about things. And I'm a big believer that I feel like the intention behind any action creates a different action, even if the physical action's the same, but the intention's different. I saw a quote recently that said, "I looked in your cup to see if you had enough, and you looked into mine to see if I had more than you. We are not the same." So it's the same. That's the same action. I'm looking into your cup, but there's a different intent. There's a different energy. If I'm looking in your cup to see if you have enough, and you're looking in mine to see if I have more than you, those actions are exactly the same action, but they have a different energy behind them. And the I feel like the intention with which you do anything, even if it's the same action as somebody else, there's a different energy to it. I actually think that I think there's an absolute magic to doing things with no thought of getting anything back. I mean, everything I'm doing nowadays that is really cool came from those things. So my wife and I and son moved back to Australia in the end of 2006, and we took two reining stallions with us, and we got on the board of Reining Australia there, which is the governing body of reining in Australia. They asked us to come on to help them with some things. And so we got on the board to help. Like we didn't necessarily want to get on the board and be political or whatever. Uh, and at a board meeting one time, they said, so Equitana is a huge, big horse expo in Australia. And we got a letter at the board meeting, and it said, "Can someone do a reining demonstration at Equitana?" And I lived closest to where Equitana is than anybody else. I was only 8 hours away. Everybody else was 24 hours drive, that sort of thing. I said, "Yeah, I can go down and do that, no problem." So I agreed to do that because I was in a position to help, no problem. I'm not doing it because I'm going to get, it's not a paying job or anything. And so I said, yeah, I'll do that. And then Equitana found out I was coming down, and they have a like a road to the horse colt starting competition thing. And they said, would you like to be the in arena announcer, like the color commentator, not the introductions, but the explaining stuff? And I said, yeah, I'd love to do that. So when I did the running demo, and then I did the road way of the horse thing for 3 days, and there's probably 4 or 5 thousand people each day watching that competition in that main building. Um, and I was just explaining what I could see going on. Anyway, after we got back from that, I had a lot of phone calls and said, "Hey, we saw you at Equitana. Love the way you explain things. Would you like to do a clinic for us?" I'm like, "Sure." I'd never thought of doing clinics before, but okay, if you want me to do a clinic, I'll do a clinic. So that started the clinics here. So while I was in Australia, I did quite a few clinics, not because I'm going to do clinics. They asked me to do clinics. But the reason they asked me to do clinics, because I did something for nothing. I did something to help out, not to get anything back from it. So then we moved back to America at the end of 2010 and early 2011. I've got to start my business all over again. And initially I've got problem warm bloods, and because of the clinics I did, I noticed that a lot of people have some struggles with horses just because their perspective or whatever could be a bit different. And so I started making these little video clips of me working with these problem horses and putting them on YouTube and Facebook, just showing them some things that they can do to make life easier. That's the only reason I was doing it, was to help people out. And then people wanted longer clips, like, can we see the whole session? Because I was videoing the whole sessions. And at the time, I don't know if it's the same now, but at the time, you could not put longer than 10 minutes on YouTube unless you had a certain number of views on your channel. And so I said, well, I really can't put longer videos. And I don't think Facebook would let you put longer videos on either. And so I found this video hosting site that would host the videos, but they wanted to charge me $300 a month to host them. But they do have an e-commerce section to it where people can give them their credit card to watch it. And so I started charging people to watch the videos. And so basically my income these days comes from video subscription and clinics. Those two things came to me because I volunteered to help with no thought of getting anything back. I was a horse trainer. That's where I was making my money, if you call that money when you train horses. But you know what I mean? That's the thing I was doing for commerce. I was doing that for commerce. And do you know who, you ever heard of a music producer named Rick Rubin? He's a famous music producer. He's won a lot of Grammys or whatever. But I saw an interview with him recently, and you'll love this. They said to him, "So Rick, what happens if you put out music that people don't like?" And he said, "I don't make music for other people. I make music for me." He said, "And it seems that when I make music for me, that's the music that's most successful." He said, "If you're making music for other people, that's not art, that's commerce." That's not art. That's commerce. He's doing art. Art comes from here. Commerce comes from, I'm going to get something back from it. And I kind of feel like what I was doing was art. Like I was doing things I was passionate about and wanting to help. I didn't have a business plan in the back of my mind, like, oh yeah, I'm going to do this. And then here, this path that I've gone down, I didn't give any thought as to whether it was going to be commercially viable or not. This new stuff I was doing. Like I didn't give any thought, like this is what I'm interested in. And I was quite honest about it. Just so happens, in the horse training for the general public, clinician-y type demographic, it's 95% women, basically 35 to 65-year-old with kind of a peak in the middle. So, in the middle of that's middle-aged women, and they're all looking for a bit of spiritual enlightenment anyway. But it wasn't like I had this plan like, oh, you know what? Most of the demographic of the people who are interested in what I do, they're kind of searching for a bit of spiritual awakening. So why don't I there was none of that. I didn't even give any of that any thought. I was just interested in going down this path. I went down this path, and it actually, it was actually better, as far as business goes, it was better than it was before. But that's, none of the things that I've ever done have had, or the things that I've done have been successful, have not had a monetary value attached to them. I mean, even be a horse trainer. When I came to America for a year, and I worked for a cow horse trainer named Don Murphy, and when I was leaving there after that year, the day I was leaving, we shook hands on his porch, and he said to me, if you want to come back, I'll give you a job. He says, you could do this for a living if you wanted to. I had never, ever given that a moment's thought, because I'd never been real self-confident. So I wasn't like, yeah, I'm a good horse trainer. I want to be a horse trainer. I'm going to train horses, and then I'm going to do clinics, and I'm going to make videos. And when I was doing clinics in Australia, people would say, you're going to make, this is back when everybody was doing DVDs, like, you're going to make DVDs? I said, no, if you want to do the reining stuff, look at Andrea Fapani's DVDs. They're great. If you want to do the groundwork stuff, look at this guy's. They're great. I mean, I was trying to palm that off. You know what I mean? I was trying like, oh, that's not me. I don't need to do that. But the universe kept shoving that stuff at me and made it work. So, but yeah. So, I really feel like there's a magic to doing things with no thought of getting anything back, that you cannot. It has to be honest. It has to be pure. It can't be, yeah, I'm going to do this and pretend that I'm doing it out of the goodness of my heart, but I think it's going to make me rich. I don't think that works. I think the universe kind of laughs at you when you do that.
And I'm not sure you even do those things. Like they do you in a way.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It just comes to you. Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like, all this stuff that I'm interested in, whatever. It's just a message that's coming through me. I'm not the messenger. It's just a message the universe wants to get out, and it's coming through me. I don't get too wrapped up in being the messenger. I just do what I'm interested in and stick to that.
But how do you know like how to act on that? It's passion driven, like the idea is coming for the video and then you are just need to be quick to grab it. Like how?
I don't know if you need to be quick to grab it, but have you ever read Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert?
Yeah.
Yeah, that sort of, if the universe gives you ideas and you don't use them, it'll give them to somebody else. I think I just happened to grasp them when they got given to me, but it wasn't, oh, I need to grab this before it goes away sort of thing. It's just like, this is what I feel called to do.
So another thing, it's coming with a feeling, like you are going towards what feels right.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing, because I feel like my whole life I've always taken the easy way out. Oh, this is getting too hard. I'm going to do something different, whatever. And I think I have probably some negative self-talk about that. But if I look at it as like, I wouldn't be here if I'd have kept beating my head against whatever it was I thought was going to work, sort of thing. You know what I mean? Um, so yeah, but I do feel like you do miss out on some growth when you make everything easy. Having some struggles is good. So like I did ice baths for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. Um, I feel like they were good for me because they were good for discipline, because they suck. No one wants to do them.
Yeah.
It's not like I enjoyed them. Um, yeah, so and I've bungee jumped 4 times. I've jumped out of a plane. I did, and that scared the hell of me. I didn't want to do that, but I felt like, it's something you can do that kind of pushes the edges.
So you're trying,
Sorry, I'm still, yeah, I
it's
dropped something.
okay. I think it's amazing. You're trying in a way to expand your comfort zone instead of, and then operating from your uh, passion zone or whatever it is, but it's not like the whole theory of doing what is uncomfortable to grow. No, you are doing something different. You're expanding your uh, desired zone. Or
Yeah, well, I think the things I did were not, they weren't desires. Um, but I do feel like it was good for me doing those things that I was scared to do, that I didn't really want to do, you know.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I felt they were helpful. A couple of years ago, I did a crazy adventure race thing in Argentina, in the Patagonian region of Argentina, a horse race called the Gaucho Derby. That was quite a big undertaking, and that was really good for that sort of thing.
wow. S- yeah. So I want to thank you. It was an amazing experience for me. I think there is a lot of stuff for people to stay with, to contemplate on, to listen to. And super, super thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. Welcome. I would love having these conversations.